Incoming UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has called on the country to unite in the face of economic challenges. Sunak takes over from Liz Truss, who you might remember resigned last week after being in office for a tumultuous 44 days. Now, he previously warned against Truss's economic policies, saying they would plunge the country into chaos. And now it's his turn to try to transform and grow the economy. For more on what we can expect, let's bring in Professor Anthoni van Nieuwkerk, who's with the University of South Africa. The Prof joins us via our video link this morning. And it's great to see you, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time. So we know that Rishi Sunak is obviously the first leader of the UK of colour, likely to be. He is the youngest in 200 years, we're told, and also happens to be the richest Prime Minister. So there's a lot of trivia around who this man is. But what do we know about what he brings to this position?
Yeah, no, indeed, good morning and thanks for the opportunity. Lots of people are fascinated by his particular colourful background. He's richer than the king and, you know, the first person of color, etc., etc. And we had the same hype when President Obama ascended to the presidency in the United States. We were fascinated by his background and so on and so forth. But I think the real question is, if you disregard all of that colorful stuff, and clearly he's a smart young man, there's no question about that, and he's part of the upper class, you know. This is not a working class person who rose through the ranks. So he belongs to the ruling elite in British society. And the question is whether he would be able to bring the policy instruments to bear to deal with the economic crisis that the UK faces, which is a result of not only Brexit, but also the war between NATO and Russia in the Ukraine. And I must say, broader, the question of where the UK belongs in the world and global politics today. And then fourth, if I may just make that agenda, that list, his job is to unite a very fractious and some people say broken Conservative Party with an election around the corner, and he will be facing Labour. And so I think those are the challenges domestic in Europe and then broader in the global economy that he has to face.
Right.
He probably his redeeming feature is that the MPs are so sick and tired of incompetent leadership that they rushed to embrace him, and I think he will receive a lot of support from his fellow party members and from politicians across the Western world, because nobody wants a broken UK that plays an important role globally with nuclear weapons on the Security Council to continue with this disastrous course of action.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that because, I mean, it was just in September when Rishi Sunak lost the leadership race to Liz Truss, even within the Conservative Party. In fact, some of his critics, detractors, if you like, are saying this is a man who only won because there was no one else going against him. In other words, he got there by default and not necessarily by being elected.
You're quite right. He was not voted in,
right.
And some people hold this against him. He was the last of a long line of candidates who are put forward by the Conservative Party just to fill the Prime Minister's seat. And of course, Labour, and I would say, you know, many in civil society are quite angry about this. An unelected, you know, upper class, very rich, privileged man who is going to run as Prime Minister. But again, I must say, on the other hand, and I understand all of that, and that's why people relish the idea of a general election. On the other hand, he's a former finance minister. He knows the game. He understands the power and influence of global capital. And I think everybody on the right is waiting for him to reset the British economy and the British politics in terms of Western influence in the world.
You know, there's interestingly people already drawing parallels between him and Cyril Ramaphosa insofar as them being successful businessmen who now have to run countries. In our sense, there are people warning us that it didn't necessarily work out as we had hoped, especially when you look at our economy. I mean, barring the other global shocks like the pandemic and perhaps what's taking place in Ukraine currently. I mean, is Rishi Sunak really well placed to run the UK, given the fact that you can't really run a country the way you do a business?
Yeah, I'm skeptical about the very fast rise of businessmen from good universities with an MBA and with marrying into rich families. It sounds like our own president.
Yeah.
Who are then taking on, the political and social tasks of governance, actually. And you have to preside over a very complicated bureaucracy and administration, a foreign policy and a domestic policy. And this requires a skill set that I don't think businessmen always have. Trump is a businessman in the first instance. And so when businessmen and women, I don't know about many examples, when they ascend to the political throne, you have to ask, in whose interests would they govern? Their own sort of network of economic and business interests, and many of them have to protect a business empire, or do they really govern in the national interest? And I think it's a fine line, and I think that the evidence doesn't look too good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess many people will say we should give him an opportunity to see what he can pull off, given Liz Truss's tumultuous 45 days. It's becoming a cliche, isn't it? Prof, thanks very much indeed for helping us connect the dots, at least as so far as you see it. Professor Anthoni van Nieuwkerk is with the University of South Africa. In fact, is with the School of Public and International Affairs. Once again, thanks very much indeed for your time.